Hey folks, what's going on? I am Pruitt. Hope you're doing well. I'm unbelievable as always. And in this week's video, we're going to talk about Premiere Pro, continuing our little tutorial session for the folks that are just getting started with Premiere Pro. And we're going to take a look at color. We're going to look at how you can better color your videos that you shoot. You can get all kinds of creative if you want, or you can just set the colors to what they really should be. There's a lot of different things to consider when it comes to shooting video as far as the color gamut goes and whatnot. Most of the time when you're starting out, you're probably not shooting in some specific profile and log and stuff like that. Most of the time you probably just got your camera out, turned on the video mode, and you're shooting. But with that said, there's a lot of times you get that footage into the computer to start editing. The colors may be just a little bit off, or they may need just a little bit of a punch. Inside of Premiere Pro, there are several tools in there that can help make your color inside of your video a lot better and just give a little more pop to your videos. So let's go ahead and fire up Premiere Pro and take a look at the coloring options inside of Premiere Pro. Okay, so I'm inside of Premiere Pro and I'm opening up a previous project, but that's okay because I'm going to just pull in some footage that I want to work with and make a brand new sequence and all of that good stuff. So let me first find the footage that I want to work with. So I'm just going to pull this up. And remember, like in the first video, all you got to do is just drag the video in. You don't necessarily have to do the import option. So just drag that footage inside your project bin here and you can get started. And now that I remember that this is a piece of 1080p footage, so I'm going to go ahead and set up a sequence that's 1080p. So I'm going to go to the file menu, new, whoops, I hate it when it does that, new sequence, and I have my little presets. This is 1080p, 29.9 frames per second, and I'm just going to hit we'll say color tutorial. That's what we'll name this sequence, just to keep things a little organized. And we're going to hit OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit save just to be safe. All right. So we got our sequence. We have our piece of footage here. And if I double click on it, remember that opens it up in your source menu. If you hit play, you can still take a look at it and listen and all of that. If you want to scrub through it, you can do that. If you want to set up in and out points, you can do that. We've already covered all of that in the first tutorial. Okay, so now I'm going to give you another trick. So I'm just going to work with just a little bit of this footage. I'm not going to use that whole clip, but I want to pull this in and I don't necessarily want to deal with the audio. I'm just worrying about how this thing looks. So when you want to drag it into your timeline, sure, you can drag it from your project panel like that, but I'm not going to do that, because when I do that, that gives me the video and the audio tracks right there on the bottom. So I'm going to hit undo. I only want the video. So you can just click up here in your source panel and you see it says drag video only. So I'm just going to drag that over. And there we have it. It is in our timeline. Now this is some footage that I shot at CES. Gentleman dealing with some inexpensive drones. I liked what he showed me, but then when I got back to look at the footage, man, I looked at this guy's face and he is way too tanned. He's a Caucasian guy, and I remember what he looked like standing there in front of him. He did not look this tan. That means basically my camera shot it in a warmer tone when you look at it. Okay, so when you're looking at video or even photography, the image can have a cool look to it or it can have a warm look to it. This has nothing to do with being hip or anything like that. It's all about color, temperature, and tint. Your cooler images tend to have a little bit more of a bluish hue to it, and the warm images tend to have a little more of an orange or red hue to them. So we're going to fix that by adjusting the white balance in this, as well as taking care of saturation, contrast, and all of that other good stuff. A lot of this stuff comes to me because I'm used to it from dealing with it in photography. I'm always editing exposure, contrast, saturation, and all of that. And all of those tools are built in right here inside of Premiere Pro. So let's go back to Premiere, and you look up at the top, you have that color workspace. Now remember, we talked about in the first video, you have all of these different workspaces that you can work with. I set my workspace up to fit my workflow, so that's why up here I have this whole quote-unquote my workspace tab, because this is what works for me. But if you haven't done anything like that just yet, you can just click on color, and it will bring up the color workspace, and it pulls up all of these tools under the Lumetri color panel. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and take a look at what's inside of this Lumetri color panel. You have basic corrections that deals with the color, temperature, white balance, exposure, contrast, yada, 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 yada. Really basic stuff there. Then if you want to get out of that menu, just click on it again and it'll collapse it for you. To move down to the next one, we'll just click on creative. This is where you're going to get a lot of different, what they call LUTs. That's L-U-T-S, which is short for lookup tables. LUTs are essentially filters. I hate saying that, but think of Instagram and think of the filters that you put on top of your pictures inside of Instagram, how it totally changes your look, changes the color tones. It can change even a lot of the contrast and things like that. Well, there are a bunch of different looks or LUTs that are available for download out there on the internet. Some are paid for, some are for free, and you can drag those LUTs inside of Premiere Pro and use them and work with your footage. So if I was to scroll through, I got a bunch of them already in here like that. So if I want to scroll through like this SL Blue Ice, that's going to make it look a little bit cooler. Okay, so if I undo that, you see it went back to a warm. If you don't want to use the drop down box, you can just use this little arrow and just sort of toggle through like that to get a little preview. Notice this one went to a monochrome, and then when you double click it, it changes it inside of your program monitor to whatever LUT that you have selected over here. Okay, so let's undo that because I don't want to do that. But that's under the creative tab, and there's a couple other tools inside of it that you can work with and adjust the color and things like that. Now the curves, again, this is very similar to photography. Curve is a pretty powerful tool if you understand how to use it. It's a little more advanced right now, so I'm just going to give you the basics of it. You have these three channels right here. You have your whites, or basically your overall exposure and contrast channel, the red channel, green, and blue. So if I was to adjust this blue channel, notice what happens to the image here in the program monitor. Clicking on this upper portion here, that's the actual saturation or how much blue is in there. So as I drag it down, the blue starts to go away, and you notice green starts to show up more because green is the contrasting color to blue. Okay, but if I bring it back up, it brings the blue back in. But if I wanted to just take out a little bit of the blue in the mid-tones, if you will, I can just click right there in the middle where it puts a point, and then I just drag it down. So I still have a little bit of blue in the highlights and in the shadows, but the mid-tones, there's not as much blue. And if you feel like you need to adjust it, you can put another point and push it up like that and make a little S-curve. Ideally, you'll see that done more so on the overall curves with the exposure, highlights, and contrast. So I'll just click right here in the center, drag it down a little bit, click over here in the highlights, push it up a little bit. So now my shadows are really dark. So I would have to try to bring the shadows up like that, but that doesn't look good. We'll get more into the curves another time, but that's an option for you. So we're going to undo that. All right, so that's the RGB curves. Next, you have color wheels and match. All of this information is really super powerful. Adobe Sensei, their AI built inside of Premiere Pro, gives you a really slick tool to use with this face detection and comparison view, and it'll allow you to color match all of your footage based off of one particular clip. I'll show you how to do that in a second. And with these color wheels here, this is going to isolate the particular ranges within the footage. This is only going to touch the shadows, this is only going to touch the highlights, midtones, and so forth. And you can push these color ranges like that. Like if I want to give it a cinematic look and give it that teal and orange look, I'm going to take these shadows and drag it down to the teal like that, and then I'll go over to the highlights and drag it on up to the orange, something like that. And the more you drag it to the edge, the more saturation you get. Or you can just use these sliders over here on the left hand side. So now you see it's getting a little more blue or teal, but I want this to have some of that orange look too, because that's that classic cinematic look. It's that teal and orange look. That doesn't look great, but that just gives you a general gist. And of course, if you screw up on these color wheels, you can always just double click on them and it will reset them. Just like everything else inside of the Premiere Pro sliders, you can just double click on the sliders and it'll reset them back to their default. Okay, so let's get out of the color wheel and match. HSL secondary, that's a little more advanced. We'll save that for another video, but essentially it allows you to isolate a particular color and make adjustment to it. If I wanted to change the color of his jacket here, I could do that. Like, let's see if I just click this little eyedropper, do like that, and then I click on this little box here and I make these adjustments to see if I can really isolate only his jacket. See, it's takes a little more precision. Click another eyedropper. All right, so now if I wanted to change the color of that, I could go down and like just drag to the blues like that. And you notice the color changed more to more of like a purple. Unfortunately, it's also coloring his face, and we don't want that. But that's, again, all of that stuff is a lot more advanced for a beginner. We'll get into all of that in another video. Okay, so let's get back to the basics and just take a look at dealing with the actual color of this footage from a basic standpoint. It's a really good idea, depending on the look that you're trying to get, is to make sure your white balance is adjusted. A lot of times in your camera, it's probably set to auto white balance, and sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. I tend to shoot a lot in a cooler temperature, somewhere, you know, like 4,000 Kelvin or below, something like that, because I like a cooler look. And I also shoot a little bit dark and underexposed because I like to fix all of that inside of post-processing to make it look a little more cinematic. But when you're inside of Premiere Pro, you can hop over to this Lumetri color panel and go to the basic correction and start with your white balance. You can click on this little eyedropper here and hover it over to anywhere inside of your program monitor that is supposed to represent white or a neutral color. Okay, so if you click right there, you'll see that it automatically changed the temperature to a little bit cooler. Because remember, if you look over here, he looks really warm in comparison to what it should look like. Let me undo and I'll show that to you again. All right, so right now we're looking at it and he's got a warm, sort of an orange look to his skin, and he shouldn't look that orange. And even if you look over here at the actual temperature, it's just set to the default. Now watch when I pick on, you know, something with the eyedropper that's a little more neutral or white, it automatically corrects the white balance and it cools him off just a touch, and that looks a lot more natural for his skin tone. Okay, so now you can get into the actual correction of handling exposure, contrast, and things of that nature. Your exposure is going to control just how bright the video is. If I drop this down, it's going to make it really dark. That's not good at all. Okay, drag it up, bring it up just a touch, not too much, because then it looks blown out and clipping, and you don't want that. That looks really bad. So you need to find a happy medium when it comes to adjusting the color. Now I'm going to go back to my workspace because there's a couple tools that I've dragged in there, and it's dealing with these little scopes down here on the bottom. I like to use these scopes to see where all of my colors are showing up. Like right here, this says the shadows has a lot more green boosted up, and over here this says the highlights have more reds boosted up. I'm okay for the moment, so I'm not going to wig out on those color levels, but it's just something that I like to use as a visual tool. And you notice when I move the exposure slider up or down, notice what happens to this little guide here. This is called your Lumetri scopes. The lower this is to the bottom, the more underexposed it is. Drag your exposure up, and you notice all of your graph spreads out and heads towards the top. So we want to try to keep a nice happy medium. I think that looks okay. The contrast is used to help differentiate the different colors on the screen. A lot of time contrast can make your image darker, but having a decent amount of contrast will allow you to break up the images and make things a little bit sharper and stand out a little bit more. Don't push it too much and don't underdo it. So as you notice, if I underdo its contrast, it starts to look a little bit flat across the whole image, even though there are different color tones in there. But as I increase it, it starts to give him a little more detail, even in the shadows of his jacket there. But we don't want to push it too much. Highlights again are on the upper end of the spectrum, and it deals a lot more with like the bright lights that you see that can tend to blind you from time to time if you overdo it. So if I push the highlights up, watch what happens like to the lights in the background there. Everything just got a little bit brighter. Even this light on the drone got a little bit brighter. So you have to be mindful of those. The highlights are actually pretty good in this to start, so I don't really have to touch it that much. So I'm just going to leave it. And let's see. I'll decrease it just a little bit. So that looks good. Whites and black levels. Pretty self-explanatory. Push the whites all the way up. It really brightens it. I don't like to do that very often. I do like to decrease the black because, again, I want a little more contrast. But if you push it too far, it looks like that. So I just take mine down just a little bit for the contrast sake. This shadow option here, shadows deal more with like the fill light is what you call it. Think if you are out on a photo shoot and you're taking a picture of somebody and you have your flash on. When that flash shines onto your model or what have you, it's filling them up with light. Okay, there's a bunch of other different light sources that may be around you, like the sun or something like that, but that flash gives one more additional light and it feels like the front of your subject there. So if I push the shadow levels up, it's going to give him a little more fill light. See? And if I take it down, it takes all of that fill light away. This is not the same as exposure, but it's pretty close because it's just dealing with light and bringing up the mid and the fill of the subject. Okay, so that's the shadows. All right, so now that's a basic color correction. All right, there's one extra tip that you can do on all of this. I'm going to reset it. Okay, back to how it was. My advice is whenever you're doing color correction, use an adjustment layer. Don't color correct directly on your footage because that's destructive and it makes it a lot more difficult to go back and fix things if you go back later and see something's out of whack. Put it on an adjustment layer. To create an adjustment layer, you go down to your project bin and you have this new item option. Click on that and you say adjustment layer. And it's going to give you this prompt to fit whatever your sequence is. Click OK. So now drag that adjustment layer over above your footage. Okay. So when you go to do your color correcting, color correct on that adjustment layer. Okay, so now let's take a look at the white balance on this. So if I click on the little eyedropper, go over here and select something white, it's going to change the white balance and make it look a little bit better. But if I turn this adjustment layer off, you'll see the difference. Okay, so all of the adjustments are done on the adjustment layer and not in particularly on our piece of footage. So let's go ahead and do some exposure, take the highlights down a little bit, give it a little bit of shadows, drop the black levels a little bit, give them a little more contrast, and there, that's looking more like it. So that all of that was done on this adjustment layer. Notice the adjustment layer is highlighted, not the actual footage. So if I turn off the adjustment layer, notice what happens to the program monitor. There's a difference. That's without the adjustment layer. That's with the adjustment layer. I'm going to cool them off just a little bit more. Something like that. Okay, there. So now that's the gist of doing basic color correction. I'm going to show you one little trick that I absolutely love this from Adobe. So I'm going to let's drag in this footage again. So we'll just drag it over. Actually, I don't want the audio, so we're going to drag it over again like that. Okay, and then I'm going to drag in another adjustment layer over the top of it like so. All right, so now we got two pieces of footage in here, but they're not the same color. This is the original, so it's really warm, and this is what we worked on, so it's a lot cooler and much better color. So if you go over to your other adjustment layer on top of the new footage, inside of the color wheels and match option, you have what they call the comparison view, and you have this face detection. When you click on comparison view, it's going to open up your reference view, and it's going to open up a current view. The current view is where my playhead is right here. Okay, the reference view is how I want my footage to look. And you can scrub through your reference view by just pushing this little playhead like that. Like if I pushed it all the way to the end, it's giving me the same footage over here. I don't want that. I want my footage to color match with this one here. So what you do is you click on this face detection, make sure your adjustment layer is selected, and then you just click apply color match, and the AI is just going to do all the work. Thinking, boom, it's done. So now if I scrub through, everything looks just like it should. If anything, I may need to go in and adjust the exposure, like so. But there, that's it. It's matched up. So if I was to turn off that adjustment layer, you'll see what it looks like now. Okay, easy little trick. Good old AI making this stuff a lot faster for you. All right, wait a minute. I cannot get out of here. I need to do one more thing for you guys. Let's take a look again at that creative side. Remember we talked about all of the different input LUTs? Let's turn off this comparison view now because we're done with that. But let's take this footage and sharpen it up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and click on the creative tab up there at the top. And then let's go ahead and just use this sharpen slider on our adjustment layer to make him look a little bit more crispy in our footage. That's much better. If I put it over here on this footage, it's not as crispy, but I can just click on the adjustment layer and sharpen him up a little bit. Take a look at him, make sure he looks all right. Oh, that's much better. See, if I was to reset it, see how soft everything looks on the skin? Click that sharpen and drag it up just a touch. You get more detail in his face and see his little stubble and his hair and everything. It looks much better. So the creative tab is not only used for lookup tables, LUTs, and other color adjustments, but you can also sharpen your image really quickly right there from that menu. There's another effect inside of Premiere Pro called Unsharp Mask. You can use that if you want. I use it every now and then. This one usually works pretty good for most of the footage that I'm using. All right. So I'm going to get on up out of here now and give you some of your valuable time back. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope this Premiere Pro tutorial for beginners has been helpful and useful for you. If you enjoyed this footage and found some good value in it, please hit the like button and please hit the share button so other folks out there trying to get started with Premiere Pro can jump on in and get their learning on. Thank you so much for your tremendous support. Be sure to hit the subscribe and the notification bell so you know whenever my new videos are uploaded. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave those questions and comments below. I read them all and I try to answer every single one of them. And until next time, get out there, start creating and dominating. We'll catch you on the next one. Peace.